Good morning, everyone. This is a pre-session 3 on combating hate speech, illegal hate speech through regulation as one of the tools. I believe Marco should take the floor, or Roberto, to remind us of how the technical setup is and the rules of conduct, and then we will kick off the session. Marco.
Yes, let me share some slides. Okay, there you go. Maybe just 1 second. In the meantime, okay, there you go.
There you go.
Okay, sorry for that. Okay, so welcome. Good morning. I'm Marco Zennaro. I'm from the ICTP, the International Center for Theoretical Physics, which is virtually hosting the activity this year and hopefully physically hosting the activity next year. As Menno said, we're in session event number 3. There's some rules. So please enter the Zoom with your full name. If you want to ask a question, raise your hand using the Zoom function. You will be unmuted when the floor is given to you. And when you're speaking, please switch on the video, state your name and affiliation, and the chat will not be stored or published. And please do not share links to the Zoom meetings, not even with your colleagues. So we said that this is the session about implementing regulatory standards on combating hate speech, challenges and opportunities. We have 3 speakers. We have Miriam Bejalmón de Blanco from the Ministry of Justice of Spain, Maria Bjarnadottir from the Committee of Experts on Combating Hate Speech, Vice Chair of the Icelandic Media Commission, and Alessandra Borchardt, member of the Committee of Experts on Freedom of Expression and Digital Technologies. The moderator is Menno Etama, Co-Secretariat to Committee of Experts on Combating Hate Speech of the Council of Europe Anti-Discrimination Department. So please, Menno, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marco, for introducing us and also alleviating me from the challenge to pronounce foreign names, which is not my specialty. I think you did really well introducing it. As you mentioned, the aim of this 1-hour event is to specifically look into the role of regulation in addressing hate speech, and then we want to focus specifically on illegal hate speech. I mean, the topic of hate speech is much broader, but in this setting, for this hour, we'd really like to go in the role of regulation of the illegal hate speech. And to this morning, we're bringing together 3 bodies of the Council of Europe. And to recall, the Council of Europe is the intergovernmental body in Europe that deals with human rights, rule of law, and democracy. And in that sense, its role in this debate is to also help member states set by providing a human rights framework for its approach. We see across Europe a range of regulatory measures developing in member states on how to address illegal hate speech. And the Council of Europe wants to engage in that debate from a human rights perspective and the rule of law. And therefore, we have the 3 bodies, as Marco introduced, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But before that, I'm very curious to see how. So what we will discuss specifically today is 2 questions, which will have a lot of sub-questions to it, but 2 questions. One is regulating illegal hate speech, and what roles and responsibilities do we expect from internet companies and state authorities. And the second one is, what do we do with the gray area cases where it's not clear if something is illegal or not, a hate speech? And I think that comes with a whole new set of specific questions from a human rights perspective. But before we give the floor to our 3 panelists to introduce their respective committees and how they stand on the issue and their approaches that they're developing, I would like to check with the audience how they see this issue. And for that, we have the Mentimeter with a very simple question. So if I can have that online, the question is, can regulation standards address online hate speech effectively? So I just wanted to get a feeling in the room. So I'm asking Roberto or Marco to show that Mentimeter and for people to respond. I am here I am looking forward to see how that works. Marco or Roberto? Okay, if the Mentimeter cannot be shown right now.
It's coming, just a second.
Sorry, okay.
Okay.
It's the first session of the event, so of course everything also needs to fall together now.
The Mentimeter is coming. I'm sorry for that. There you go.
There you go. So the Mentimeter works by going through menti.com on your smartphone or screen. There is you should submit a code, which is in the top. It's 50 34 32 91. And then you should be getting the first question, which was the one I posed. Can regulation standards address online hate speech effectively? And we're quite curious your thoughts on this point. So I'll give you a minute. There you go. The first vote came in. Just want to quickly check how many people we have. We have 23 participants. There's like 4 or 5 of us, so there should be about 20 responses. Don't be shy. After all, we can't see what you voted. So I'll give you 1 more minute. So it's we have 2 for partly, 1 for no, not at all, 3, 4 for partly. 5. Okay, 30 seconds. It's probably already over 1 minute, but 7. I see. Keep your Mentimeter on after this check-in, because also at the end, I would like to pose a question to the group after all the discussions to see how your opinion is. And I'm hoping that everybody that voted for partly or for no will speak up at the discussion session, so to further elaborate on why you think so. And maybe through the discussions we can further develop our reasoning for our points of view. We have 7 thinking partly. It's part of the answer, and 1 says no, it doesn't really make any difference. So that's an interesting result, and it raises the question, why are so many member states then actually engaging in regulatory efforts, as also the European Union and the Council of Europe. And to speak of the Council of Europe, I wanted to ask that question straight away to our 3 speakers. I'll give the floor first to Miriam Bohamonde Blanco. She's member of the Cybercrime Convention Committee. The Cybercrime, the Budapest Convention, also known as the Budapest Convention, is a beyond Europe binding convention. So it has also member states from across the globe. And I think it's one of the only and first tools on addressing cybercrime. And its additional protocol specifically deals with racism and xenophobic expressions in the online space. So in that sense, I'm very curious the point of view of the Cybercrime Convention Committee and the work that Miriam does. She works for the Ministry of Justice in Spain and has a long time experience with dealing with cybercrime, including in the area of hate speech. Miriam, the floor is yours, please.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Everything okay? Okay. Good morning. Thank you, Mena, for introducing me. My name is Miriam Bamonde, and indeed now I'm currently working as legal advisor at the Ministry of Justice. But in my former life, I was prosecutor, and one of the topics I deal with were hate crimes. So I'm quite keen on the topic. I'm trying to present this topic, putting together the idea of hate speech and how the Budapest Convention can help us prosecutors to investigate this kind of crimes. I have a PowerPoint presentation. I think I will be able to share it with you. Can you see it? It's okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Just put it on present.
Here. Perfect. Okay. So. Okay. So first of all, I wanted to say that one of the reasons of our concerns is that in our society today, which is constantly evolving, the growth of hate crime has occurred in part by the dissemination through the internet and the social networks, with both have follow up among youth. So the so-called hate speech has no longer spread as in the past, face-to-face and through lectures or speeches to an audience that expressly attends an event. But today what it's done is that many groups take advantages of the new technologies for this purpose. By the great mass diffusion that in a short time and with little effort they can carry out. Hence, that content reaches millions of users through their electronic devices. It is clear that it must be a priority for law enforcement agents, for investigating judges, and for prosecutor offices to promote investigation to combat this kind of activity. So how could we define hate speech? Hate speech, it has been defined in several fora, but I had defined it as an extreme form of intolerance that when reaches the bound of criminal liability, contributes to the crime of hatred, with a special emphasis on the impunity that is taking place when committed through the internet and on social networks. What is important to have in mind is that what is subject to punishment is not the expression itself of some ideas, and I think it leads with the debate that we will have later on. What must be punished is the expression when it is done in a way under some circumstances involve provocation to hatred, discrimination, or violence, infringing in that way fundamental rights, human dignity, and non-discrimination on the grounds of birth, origin, race, sex, religion, opinion, etc. At that point, it is important to mention that this political criminal strategy contrasts with the one followed by those states where instead of classifying this action as crime of indictment to racial or xenophobic hatred, they are grounds of aggravation of the penalty for certain offenses when the perpetrator commits them motivated by racist motivation, xenophobic, discriminatory, etc. And why is this important? Because it has an important effect in mutual legal assistance. And we know that most of the service providers are based in the United States. So they don't have the same idea of hate speech, idea, as we have, they often deny mutual legal assistance, and that's quite frustrating for prosecutors when we are dealing with those crimes. So even though we will talk about it later, I guess, there's a deep relationship again between hate speech and freedom of expression, because of course freedom of expression is a fundamental right, but this is not absolute. It has been proportionate with the right of no discrimination. Both of them are fundamental rights and have to be dealt with in the same level. So that has been mentioned several times by the European Court of Human Rights in its jurisprudence. And I've chosen a judgment, the Ferret versus Belgium, where the Human Court stated that freedom of expression is one of the essential foundational rights of a democratic society. But at the same level, freedom of political discussion does not, of course, have an absolute character. What is important that the European Court states that it may be considered necessary in democratic societies punish and even prevent all forms of expression to propagate, incite, promote, or justify hatred based on intolerance, including religion intolerance, sexual, etc., if it is ensured that that punishment or that measures are proportionate with the aim that we are searching. Going back to the role of the prosecutors or of people, law enforcement agents or judges against hate speech, there's a question that how to prosecute hate speech online. We have in mind three main aspects that concur to say that hate speech deserves criminal liability. So first of all, when we talk about hate speech, we are talking about expression, and that expression can be manifested in a plurality of behaviors. It can be a message on a social network, it can be an image, it can be a speech that is recorded or is or not, but it's said through the internet, etc. Secondly, it's important that the conduct is relevant. I mean, we do not pursue mere ideas or opinions, but only those conducts that violate the protected legal good or that are likely to generate a risk or to danger to it. And thirdly, it's important that under that speech is a discriminatory motivation. This is an absolutely essential element which distinguishes it from any other criminal figure. So the conduct must be directed towards discrimination as an expression of exclusionary intolerance towards a particular group or its members. What is sanctioned is hatred that denotes a reenactment of another human being, a contempt for his dignity, or the mere fact of being different. And that what is important too is that that can be spread to thousands, millions of people through the net. That's why that's a concern that is expressed in the first additional protocol to the Budapest Convention. For instance, what I know that better, that is Spanish legislation here, when hate speech is made through the internet or through any other technological mean that assures that it can reach our indefinite number of people, that conduct is aggravated for that reason, because the danger that it makes, that it produces, is bigger. So that's an important thing to have in mind.
I'm just a short recall of time, so if you could
yes,
grab 1 or 2 minutes more.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, I'll be short. In order to finish in my time, I wanted to show an example of how hate speech is prosecuted when it's posted on social media. So those photos are in Spanish. Sorry, I couldn't find real examples of hate speech posted in social media in English, but you can see that here they are some Twitter messages, and I can tell that they have, I'm sure most of you can read them, some hate speech against Roma. What I would do if I were a prosecutor in this case is to track the public profiles on social networks that the person under investigation may have. So imagine that I have received a complaint with those against those images. So what would I do if I were a prosecutor? Well, first of all, I would check the Twitter profile of that person. I would transcribe all the phrases, the denounced one, the previous one, and also the ones that could be posted after the denounce. I would analyze the symbology of polarization that could exist in the account of that person. For instance, some images, I don't know, with Nazi symbols, etc. It's important too to make a full account analysis to say if it remains active, the number of followers, tweet numbers, etc. The dates of creation, the dates of closure, and any other information that I could find in that account. And then what's important? That's important to do a data to preserve all that data in order to bring it to the proceedings. That's important here, and that's when the Budapest Conventions come into action, because it allows us to send to the service provider, in this case Twitter, but it could be another one, a data preservation order. In case it has headquarters in Spain, I will do it under the Article 16 of the Budapest Convention. If it were abroad, I could try to do it under Article 29, which is focused on international cooperation. And once I had the data freeze, the data preserved, what I should do is to send a data production order to that service provider. For that, I would use also the article that implements Budapest Convention, in my case in Spain, but it could be in another state member with their own domestic law. And I would send a data production order in order to know who is under that account. So the service provider would be obliged to give me the subscriber information, name, address, etc. that it had, if of course it were offering its services in Spain. If not, I could try with a voluntary disclosure that it's on the hands of the service provider. And unfortunately, if it were in the States, as I have previously mentioned, it's probably that if I am prosecuting hate speech, it wouldn't give me the information. Hopefully, soon we'll have the second additional protocol functioning, and through this, I could also send an order to a service provider in another state's territory to submit me that subscriber information. But this is not currently working. I hope it will do soon. And once the author is identified, I had the tools to make an indictment for hate speech online. Just to finish, what would happen if I couldn't have those data? If not, what I would do would be to ask for to make a judicial request to block the access, in my case from Spain, or to those web pages, but in order to at least avoid that hate speech continuous spreading. Sorry if I've taken more time that I deserve, but I try to be as quick as possible, but 5 minutes is really, really few time. Thank you very much for listening to me and for counting on me for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you also for explaining the judiciary routes that is available for prosecutors in different member states of Europe, thanks to the protocol, thanks to the Cybercrime Convention and its protocol. And I think you already pinpointed some challenges there are if the server is in a different country, you're really dependent on the cooperation between member states and the judiciary, or let's say the legislative frameworks in different countries that is aligned to actually make sure that requests are effectively followed up. Yeah, you raised a few questions, but we'll come back to that in the discussion. I would first like to give the floor to Maria Berniadottir, who is the chair of the expert committee on combating hate speech, who's working on a new committee of ministers recommendation on hate speech, and is also looking into this regulatory aspects of how to address online illegal hate speech. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mano. I am sharing my screen. Do you see the presentation? The slide?
Very clear.
Okay.
Very clear. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I am going to try and speed through very, very fast. I will try to manage. Mano, you'll just have to stop me if this gets out of hand. I am here talking on behalf of the of the expert group that is trying to work on, that has drafted a recommendation for the member states or for the committee of ministers, and that it's going to aim to the member states. And our mandate was to draft a comprehensive, to have a comprehensive approach at the center of the recommendation. And this is what we have tried to do. I think in many ways, I don't have to explain to anyone attending this session how complex and diverse in many ways hate speech can be. And hate speech, of course, is a major problem to a varying degree within the member states. But of course, it is not only a problem for the individuals that are faced with hate speech or the group that those individuals are a part of, it is a democratic issue. Hate speech, of course, yes, I will address that a little bit later. But what we have to guide our work in both the expert group and the member states is the human rights framework that is offered through the standards of the Council of Europe, and of course, especially as interpreted by the court. So what we have tried to do is to offer a comprehensive approach within a human rights framework, but also offer some practical tools. I just want to really quickly kind of show you, this is something that I just took from the Council of Europe website earlier, and you see the range of issues that the Council of Europe is working on regarding hate speech. So there's a range of different groups that are affected by hate speech and that the Council of Europe is trying to address. But what we have to focus on in what we are doing, at least in the expert group, is helping the member states to recognize and outlaw and preferably prevent and then fight instances of hate speech in their country. So in our approach, we have addressed, oh yes, sorry. So in our approach, we have addressed the definition of hate speech, and we have proposed a layered approach to hate speech. So we propose what is referred to as illegal hate speech, that would be hate speech that is subject to criminal liability. Then we refer to hate speech that should be subject to civil or administrative liability, so not the most severe form of hate speech. And then the third or the third level, that would be hate speech that is not illegal, but is harmful, causes prejudice, raises concerns in terms of tolerance and such. So what we propose is that the member states put in place measures to react to such instances of hate speech with non-legal responses and measures. In our recommendation, a draft recommendation, we propose suggestions for the member states in terms of legal framework, but also specifically regarding the online framework. And this, of course, comes from the fact that so much of communication now takes place online. We discuss that it's not only the member states that have a place or should play a role in curbing hate speech. There's a range of actors that need to be included, but we also highlight that the member states have to do more than just legislate. Yeah, so the guiding principles, the human rights guiding principles that we're looking at are, of course, Article 10 and Article 8. And these principles demand that legality, necessity, and proportionality are key factors in any legal measures that are taken. Further, as is addressed in Article 17 of the Convention, of the European Convention on Human Rights, speech that goes against the fundamental elements of the Convention doesn't enjoy the protection of the Convention. And this is something that we have to consider as well. And third are the positive obligations of states. So states have a positive obligation under the European Convention of Human Rights to protect civil discourse, to protect democracy. This is an obligation that we very much look towards in the draft recommendation that we put forward. As regards the legal framework, there are maybe four kind of key elements that we have had to think about. It's the efficiency of the legislation, the clarity. We have to think about the various regulatory models at play, and of course that there are both online and offline instances of hate speech that need to be covered. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the key stakeholders and what we can expect from these. So I'll do that just a little bit later. In Article 5 is where we...
Maria, I need to warn you about the time. So if you could
wrap
up in 1 or 2 minutes, 1 or 2 minutes max.
Okay,
quickly.
Great. So what I wanted to say here is that the 3 different categories of hate speech that we are recommending, they all require different responses and different measures. So there's a range of measures that we are looking to states having to enable. And what I want to highlight here is that it's not only about legislating or enforcing legislation, it's about recognizing the issue. So if we don't recognize that there is hate speech that takes place, that it can take place in different corners or in big platforms, we won't be able to detect the cases. So a legislation is essential, but recognizing the issue is the important thing to be able to use the legislation. We have to think about the enforcement of the legislation being practical. And in this, we need, especially as regards the online environment, we need to think about cooperation, or not cooperation, but facilitating communication with the online platforms. There's prevention, awareness raising, and countermeasures. But we also need to think about the monitoring and the analysis, because and that feeds into the recognition of the issue. There are, of course, other actors than states addressed in the recommendation, and we think about the internet intermediaries quite extensively. I think these slides will be available later, but we need to urge the platforms, the internet intermediaries, to focus on human rights in their operations. And that's something that this recommendation, I hope, will help with. But it's not only the platform, it's not only the states, there are other actors. There are, for example, the politicians, there's the media, the civil society organizations. And in the recommendation, we recommend all of these parties play an active role in countering hate speech. The draft recommendation is now open for consultation on the Council of Europe website, and I hope that you will take some time and take a look at it and maybe leave a comment or two. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maria. It was, I know I'm co-secretary to the committee, so I know that there's a lot of information to cram in a very small time. So thank you for that. I think you highlighted all the points, and I'll put the link to the draft document, which is now up for public consultation in a minute in the chat. But this is an ongoing work, so the final document will probably look quite significantly different than this version but I think it shows really the comprehensive approach. And while this session is only going to look into illegal hate speech and specifically the role of regulation, I think your presentation, Maria, acknowledges straight away that hate speech can not only be addressed through regulation, and there's many other actions to do: awareness raising, education, monitoring, etc., etc. But when it comes to the online space and how to regulate this, I think you touched also on human rights and the various needs for non-discrimination, Article 8, Article 14, Article 17, but also Article 10, freedom of expression. And in that sense, I'm very happy that Alexandra Borchardt joined us as a member of the Committee of Experts on Freedom of Expression and Digital Technologies, who's working specifically on finding this balance. And this doesn't, their committee does not focus on hate speech alone. It's a much broader understanding of online content and how to address it, and also acknowledging that there are different needs when it comes to different types of content. But I think you have a valuable contribution to make to this discussion. So Alexandra, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, hi, good morning, everyone. And obviously hate speech is one of the major downsides of freedom of expression, which doesn't mean that, as Miriam already said, freedom of expression is no absolute right. So let me share my screen. Okay, I'm sure you can see it now. Yeah, let me run through first what we do in this committee, where I am a rapporteur on drafting the recommendation on the freedom of expression and digital technologies. Obviously, there's tons of opportunities that digital technologies provide, and I just listed them here, so I don't have to go through them in detail. But obviously, you know that everyone gets the opportunity to participate, even marginalized groups that are very much targeted by hate speech, but still digital technologies open up a whole array of opportunities to participate, finding shared communities and help cultures and maybe marginalized cultures to get a voice and opportunities to network. Obviously, individuals and institutions have access to a broader and diverse audience, even globally. Entrepreneurs get unprecedented opportunities, and I myself am a journalist, or have been a journalist for a very long time, and I'm really impressed how much entrepreneurial spirit is there just in the area of journalism alone. And also personalization is an opportunity because it helps to serve individual needs and can be even life-saving at times when you see the pandemic. But also you see that the downsides of digital technologies and I'm just really run through this because I'm just repeating them here. The public sphere is shaped by business models of the attention economy. Private platform monopolies shape public discourse. Relevant and important content gets crowded out. Democratic institutions face erosions as face erosion as gatekeepers, and we've all been witnessing this. Anti-democratic forces, even within governments, even within democratically elected governments, are unable to spread targeted content, and they do so. And then last point, very much important and relevant in this context, voices get silenced because of targeted harassment and bullying. So freedom of expression is actually canceled if someone doesn't dare to speak up. So that is a major tension here between freedom of expression and people going silent because they are targeted by hate speech. So what we propose in our recommendation, we have six areas that we propose that needs to be worked on. First, the policies must be human rights enhancing, and we already had this because Maria mentioned it: prescribed by law, pursue legitimate aims, proportionate and predictable. So this should be the guidance for all policies that are enacted. Second, this can be done through infrastructure design. It can be partially achieved through infrastructure design. There needs to be open and fair access and fair competition. It also means support for independent news media, and there needs to be an infrastructure where a plurality of voices can be heard and thrive, also marginalized groups that I mentioned before. Third, and this is really key, transparency about rules, and I'll get to this in a bit when I talk a little bit more about content regulation. There needs to be a transparency out about the rules, where how content is selected. As you know, big private monopolies make choices about algorithms and the distribution of content and the emphasis on certain parts of content. And this is basically a black box. So transparency about these black boxes is really vital, because here are private monopolies shaping the public sphere. Then there need to be ample opportunities for accountability and redress of victims of hate speech, for example, and that also links to transparency. But the key is that this needs to be really easily accessible for people who are not super knowledgeable and who are no coders and have no digital skills in the deeper sense. So that there need to be opportunities to just to get redress. And this is also linked to what Miriam said about prosecution, because we all know that actually what's illegal in the online sphere is actually the same as it is in the offline sphere, but the sheer volume of speech is just so much harder to tackle in the online sphere. Yeah, and then there is education and empowerment. That's also an issue that's always mentioned, and I guess I think Maria mentioned it as well, which is really important to help people to be informed digital citizens, not digital citizens, but citizens operating in the digital world. And last but not least, and this has been a key point also in our committee, there needs to be support of independent research as foundation of regulation, because regulation that is not based on scientific evidence is something we shouldn't really pursue. And obviously there's lots of data out there that is in these black boxes, that is public private property of the private companies. So one of our major recommendations is to help independent researchers to get access to data to really make informed decisions about how to approach regulation is one of our key points. Yeah, and what we had as a deliverable is a guidance note, which is on content moderation. And let me sum this up. This is already out there. You can access it, and I think Menno wanted to propose the link. This is really based on research, what's actually been working in other industries, because obviously self-regulation is not entirely new. It's been done in other industries. So what are the guiding principles, which is you need transparent self-regulatory standards. So standards setting by independent experts is key. Not one party needs to have or should have disproportionate power. Then it's about meaningful objectives and benchmarks. So codes of acceptable behavior need to be set that need to be based on scientifically justified criteria, and benchmarks need to be set to ensure the success of self-regulation. So too many things are enacted and done without ever checking on, has this been successful? So this is really define what success looks like, and then set these standards. Another point, accountability and objective evaluation. So there needs to be reporting of progress, and it needs to be made public, transparent procedures for outside parties, again, to register their concerns, objections. There needs to be an objective evaluation of the benchmark and periodic audits to determine compliance and outcomes. And there needs to be maybe that the best practice is oversight by an appropriate global regulatory body. So let's see what that could be in our case. So let me finish with the key principles for human rights-based approach to content moderation. And I'm quoting the work here from Joe McNamee, who's the author of the guidance note, and who's been very active in our committee doing this. So first of all, it's all about transparency, and this is the one really important principle. It's essential for ensuring accountability, flexibility, non-discrimination, effectiveness, and proportionality. And also it helps when we run into conflicts of interest, helps to mitigate them. So transparency is really key for content moderation. What do you do, when, why, what are the rules below that? So let's see, something is here. Yeah, human rights enhancing policy should be the default option. Restrictions need to be made only when necessary and proportionate, and obviously everyone realizes that human rights can be conflicting. Like freedom of speech is another. It can conflict with non-discrimination. Right to privacy is also something. So human rights are not absolute, as Miriam rightly said, but there are conflicts. And so they should be set as a default options, and then if there is a restriction, there needs to be transparency about why.
Alexandra, can I ask you to speed up a little bit now, because we have about 10 minutes left for the discussion. So.
I'll be done in a minute. Problem identification and targets. There need to be targeted solutions for varying problems, because it's not always the same. The one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work here. There needs to be meaningful decentralization, and that is important too, because there are cultural differences, and this was also mentioned, I think, by Miriam, that lots of the freedom of speech approaches is very much US based, US defined by US companies. So there need to be multi-stakeholder participation to make sure that cultural differences are not used as an excuse to restrict speech, but it needs to be meaningful and needs some sort of oversight. Key and important point: communication with the user. Users need to be clear what the rules are this game is played for, what the terms of services are, what the tools are to communicate with companies, with whoever they want to get redress. So very clear rules are important. And lastly, high-level administrative safeguards need to be put down. Predictable, clear legal framework is really central, and there need to be really high-level safeguards. And last but not least, peculiarities of self and co-regulation need to be addressed. It's different from media self-regulation, and it's new. It's entirely new, because there are so many actors involved in producing content and spreading content. So it just can't be copied from a regulating media approach. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. And as you asked, and as you mentioned, I put up the links to the various committees and their draft recommendations and or the guidance note in the chat, so people can follow more of the discussion there, or the work that's being worked on there. We have 10 minutes remaining. I was hoping for a bit more, but I do want to acknowledge the vast amount of information that's already provided. So I'm just going to open the floor straight away to our participants if they would like to raise a question to our panelists or to each other, because it is, after all, a discussion. And specifically, I mean, I had two questions in mind. One is when it comes to illegal hate speech, and we're talking about takedown, criminal prosecution. What may we expect from the digital platforms and national law enforcement? So it's very much Miriam mentioned a few of the challenges. And Maria, the need for a clear legal framework, but also oversight and transparency in the process. And the other question for me is, how do we deal with gray area cases where it's not so clear if it's illegal hate speech or not? And what can we then expect from our law enforcement agencies, prosecution, and also from the companies? Let me check if there's any questions or answers, responses from the audience. That would be great. And I'm here trying to find if any hands were raised. If not, I would like to maybe ask our panelists also if they would like to respond to each other's. I see one hand raised. Jorn.
Yeah, thank you. And just one question. How would you deal with different legal standards concerning hate speech in different countries? The internet, as we know, is global, and Europe hasn't got a unified set of freedom of speech standards, and criminal laws are national. And there might be something which is well protected by freedom of speech in one country and deemed to be illegal in another country. So how would you deal with that?
That is a very clear question and a very tricky one, I think. Different national regulatory frameworks might make it difficult to have a European-wide approach. Who would like to pick up that question?
Well, I was hoping Miriam would, because of she's the legal expert. But let me say something. I mean, I think it's really important. I mean, in a democratically elected, in a democratic country, there need to be national particularities and rules that need to be made there, and it's actually up to the parliaments in these countries to define the rules, and we have to really trust the democratic process. I mean, for example, I am from Germany. I'm German, so obviously there are certain rules about denying the Holocaust, whatever, that you can't, that this is not permitted speech. So your freedom of expression stops there, which would probably not be the case in the US. So there need to be national particularities that are important to consider.
Well, of course, but for example, take a police video. A video of a police action that is deemed to be illegal in one country and is maybe a very important piece of democratic discourse in other countries. So should we go back to the lowest common denominator concerning freedom of speech in Europe? So we have only those things on social media which is allowed in all countries, or should we go the other way around and have everything that is allowed in a single country available to everybody, and of course then disrespect some criminal laws in some countries?
Georgi, I know that Miriam had to excuse herself suddenly. So I know that Georgi is working also with the Cybercrime Convention. So maybe you can answer this or respond to this.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. And apologies again on behalf of Miriam. She had to leave unexpectedly for another commitment that she had planned before. But I guess that the answer to the question would depend. And again, I don't interpret it entirely as the question asked about criminal liability for illegal hate speech, because actually, when you look at our main standard, I mean, in speaking on behalf of the cybercrime community, representing also not simply the Cybercrime Convention Committee, in which I worked for some years, but also the cybercrime division in general. If you look into the first edition protocol on xenophobia and racism, there is recognition that the criminal liability can be actually waived in some cases and not actually criminalized by the state if there are other effective measures available. And this is actually a very clear statement in the main text of the additional protocol that refers to the other means of, let's say, reaction or to legal hate speech online, rather than just imposing criminal liability and dealing with it with other let's say, measures like administrative responsibility, mediation, or any other thing. So I think that we should start with that premise. But when it comes to criminal liability, I guess that the clear-cut case will be to look into the overall criminal justice nature of when it comes to cybercrime, let's say, or in an online hate speech, which attains the criminal liability in this case as well. Because again, the criminal justice remains the matter of sovereign states. So most of it's still driven by the decisions of national states in terms of what they would like to criminalize, unless, of course, there is a very clear standard expressed in international law. In this case, let's say the Budapest Convention or the other treaty, or potential treaty, and I'm referring to a treaty as an obligatory text in international law that actually compels the states to harmonize their approaches. So basically, and then there is then the monitoring mechanism, which is ensuring that there is a high level of compliance. And again, the first additional protocol to the convention, which specifically refers to some of the, for example, offenses that Alexandra, the speaker before, was referring to, and that relate to xenophobia, racism, that would be a very clear standard. So there is no way, if you are party to the first additional protocol, you have to have those offenses in your legislation, and that will be then monitored by the Cybercrime Convention Committee in several rounds of assessment whether a state is compliant with the obligation. But for the others, unfortunately, the short and fast answer would be, because the criminal justice is still very much a remit of individual states, there it's still very much dependent on individual states. And then, of course, the whole issue of jurisdiction in cyberspace comes into play. I don't want to open the Pandora's box here, which is really, really difficult. And this is, again, one of the things that the second additional protocol is going to regulate to some degree, in which there could be some more cooperation between the states. But it's still very much a national matter, to just summarize it quickly from our side.
Yeah, and if I may add to this, as the co-secretariat of the Combating Hate Speech Committee, there are also efforts, for example, with the EU to regulate or to get a more common line between member states on what is illegal hate speech, for example, and that hate speech also becomes a European crime. So there are efforts here to streamline approaches between member states. And this is, of course, the 26 from the European Union, but similarly, the definition that the Committee of Experts on Combating Hate Speech is trying to work on is trying to also facilitate more alignment within the 47 member states of the European continent. We are a few minutes before closing, so I would like to ask the organizers to, the technical organizers, to maybe already show the Mentimeter, because I'm very curious if people had a different response now on the same question, if regulation is the answer. Can regulatory standards address online hate speech effectively? And if your thoughts have changed after this 1 hour session. And meanwhile, we have 1 more minute maybe for a question or for a closing remark from the participants, just to see if there is any. And meanwhile, feel free to fill in the Mentimeter. I'm very curious on responses.
Can I
Thank you. The first one's in. Yes, please.
I just want to pick up on the point that has been discussed here about the national legal frameworks and the international nature of platforms. And I think it's really important for us to remember that the platforms are not created in a conceptual vacuum. They introduce very much American standards. So the platforms have, even if they have if they originated in America and kind of adapt a lot of their standard setting from the American perspective, it's still not a everything goes situation that they have on the platforms. And we see that increasingly that the platforms have a commercial interest, not to facilitate hate and negative discourse. And for many of the platforms, it seems like that is the driving force maybe in the action that they're taking. And I don't know if that's really a bad thing, you know, whatever it takes to facilitate a kind of a democratic space, I think we should celebrate. I just wanted to kind of add that. So that it's not only regulation that drives changes, it can also just be pure commercial interest.
Thank you very much, Maria. And I think this is also why, for example, the Council of Europe has a dialogue platform with the internet industries And similarly, for example, the European Union has the Code of Conduct working with the internet industries on addressing illegal hate speech. We are at the end of the session. I saw that there were 4 responses on the Mentimeter, all saying partly. Hopefully that reflects the spirit of the recommendation that Maria has introduced, that we really need a comprehensive approach to address hate speech. So it's not only the regulation, but it's also awareness raising, education, and the dialogue with the internet industry. I saw nobody being mordicus against it, but that could also be because we've convinced this person or the person had to leave, which is also part of reality at a conference like this. Nonetheless, I hope it was an interesting exchange, thought-provoking, also good reminders of the institutions and the standards that are in place and that hopefully guides the internet space to make it a pleasurable and beneficiary platform for everyone, and freedom of expression and everybody to fully express their opportunities and create opportunities online, regardless of their backgrounds and their identities. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the speakers, Maria, Miriam, and Alexandra. Thank you for your inputs, colleagues for helping to organize this, and colleagues at EuroDIG for the technical support. And I close with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Menno. Thank you very much to all the speakers. Now we have a break up to 11:45. So please return to GatherTown. So to do so, you need to close the Zoom room, then return to the relevant tab and go back to GatherTown. Okay, so here you will find a minimap icon at the bottom of the screen next to your name. It will also indicate your location. And if you need any assistance, please go to the help desk. Okay, so again, thank you very much. Enjoy your break and see you at 11:45.